You're about to see now is a grisly story of one man's crime and punishment.
3 masked men went into the bank with guns. Ramos was one of those men.
The teller in the bank recognized this man, Philip Hutchinson.
Some too afraid to talk on camera because the suspects were in a gang.
Ram it. And that blade was going around and everything, and I said, oh my God, we're going to get cut in pieces or something's going to happen to us.
Houston, California, a small city in Stanislaus County with the population being just a little over 7,000 as of this year. But let's go back 50 years. In the year 1970, there was a sheriff named Billy Joe Dickens. He was a 36-year-old man who has been a sheriff for the county for almost 9 years. He served nearly 4 years as a United States Navy serviceman and was honorably discharged in 1956. He was a well-respected man. On January 27, 1970, 2 men, Leonard Miller and Ross Porter, were on a mission to rob a bank in Houston, and these 2 were not amateurs. They both had a nasty criminal history and were known for committing robbery. Shortly before 3 p.m., the Central Valley National Bank was just getting ready to close. This is when both Leonard and Ross went inside and herded 15 hostages into the bank's vault. The 2 managed to clean out the vault, taking $20,000 and closed it, leaving the employees in there. Luckily, one employee was able to activate a silent alarm right before they were all forced into the vault. Once the alarm button was pushed, 2 sheriffs would immediately rush to the scene. The 2 sheriffs were Charles Moore and Billy Joe Dickens. The 2 sheriffs had gotten a radio call and rushed to the bank where they would park on the side of the bank. They both saw Ross holding onto a pile of cash with one arm and a weapon in his other hand. Both sheriffs quickly got out of their vehicle, drew their weapons, and ordered Ross to put his hands up. Ross did just that, but as he did, Leonard came out and shot Billy from behind about 10 meters away. Leonard fired twice, hitting Billy's lower back and once in his arm. Charles turned around to see Billy on the ground but still alive. This started a shootout between the robbers and Charles Moore. Charles shot all of his rounds and managed to strike Leonard in the arm. While Charles was in the middle of reloading his weapon, the 2 robbers stole the sheriff's unmarked vehicle that was still running, including Billy's revolver. Charles began firing as the robbers fled and only managed to hit the car 3 times. More than 150 officers began searching for the robbers on foot and in helicopters. Leonard and Ross drove 30 miles east to Los Nogales Road, where they had stashed a second vehicle. They took off their raincoat, mask, and hat and left them behind. Once the 2 got into their second vehicle, they began to drive up north to Altaville, that's 40 miles away. At 4:45 p.m., the police found the stolen unmarked vehicle, as well as the robber's raincoat, hat, and an empty gauze bandage container. This was thanks to the many tips they received by nearby witnesses. Inside the vehicle, they also found a large quantity of blood and Billy's gun. The FBI believed the third person may have been involved, so back in Houston, the police were looking at the car the 2 robbers drove to get there. They were able to find the man who previously owned the vehicle. The man who sold the robbers the car gave their identities to the FBI. He also agreed on helping them out. As the 2 robbers were driving to Altaville, they called their third man to meet up with them at Altaville, requesting blankets and medical supplies meant for Leonard. They agreed to meet up at a service station. Shortly after midnight, lawmen surrounded the town and warned Carlo that would follow the undercover to the meetup spot. However, the undercover seemed to have panicked in the middle of his mission and drove past the service station where he was supposed to meet the 2 men. But luckily, the lawmen had spotted them in their vehicle and the fugitives immediately sped off. The lawmen and fugitives began firing at each other. Unfortunately, a nurse who was on her way home drove in the middle of the shootout and was struck on her arm, but thankfully she was able to recover just fine. The robbers sped off towards Comanche Lake, just 24 miles away from Altaville. They stopped near Campo Seco, and for some reason, they decided to have one final stand against the police. At about 1:30 in the morning, a patrol car found their vehicle, and this is when both robbers ambushed and started firing at the patrol car. This went on for minutes, and eventually, one of the deputies was able to hit Leonard with a buckshot. Leonard collapsed but wasn't dead. As he was on the ground, Ross ran off towards a hill nearby. Ross went to a trailer and held 73-year-old Carol Skaggs, the homeowner, hostage. It lasted for 5.5 hours. He eventually lets Carol go when he told Ross that he could escape on foot, so he left. Lawmen were all around Valley Springs, Burson, Campo Seco, and Comanche Reservoir. With that, Carroll ran out and saw a roadblock that was near the lake where police were present. He told police Ross was heading towards a hill away from the lake. With this information, the police focused on the area between Campo Seco and Valley Springs. The hunt for Ross took about 12 hours. Lawmen were exhausted mentally and physically as none of the officers ever left the scene to make sure they would find Ross. Eventually, 1 out of the 3 helicopters found Ross walking up a hill. 6 police officers quickly ran to the area Ross was said to be. The officers would find him hiding behind a bush. As police were 40 feet away, they demanded Ross to come out of the bush and surrender, but he would refuse. After a long, brutal day of chasing fugitives, 3 shootouts, and 1 sheriff being killed, the police didn't want to take any chances and fired at the bush where he was hiding. He was hit with a few shotgun slugs. Officers quickly rushed him to the San Andreas hospital but was pronounced dead on arrival. The hunt was officially over. Leonard was able to make a full recovery and was set to go to trial. He had 2 pleas. First, he pleaded not guilty, and the second time, he pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He was facing many charges such as murder, attempted murder, multiple kidnappings, grand theft of a firearm, 1 count of auto theft, and much more. He was found guilty on all counts including first-degree murder. He tried to argue that he should be given parole since he was too old to endanger society in the event he was released. He would even say, "I'm sorry I killed the man, but I'm not sorry he's under the ground and I'm standing up." In the end, he was given life in prison with the possibility of parole, but thankfully, he was never released and died in prison in 2010 at the age of 75. Now back to the day of the robbery. At 7:10 p.m., Billy Joe Dickens passed away in Stanislaus Memorial Hospital. He passed away during surgery, never getting the chance to see his wife or kids. Once the manhunt was over, more than 500 lawmen around Northern California attended his funeral. Billy Joe Dickens is always remembered in the heart of many lawmen across the country. Stockton, California. The date is July 16, 2014. A few minutes before 2 p.m., Misty Holt Singh was in her vehicle with her 12-year-old daughter, Mia, and drove to a bank located north of Stockton. She was there to use the ATM and then head back into her vehicle to get her daughter's hair done. As Misty was using the ATM, a black sedan pulled up by her. In the sedan were 4 men: Pablo Rubalcaba, Alex Martinez, Jaime Ramos, and Gilbert Renteria. These 4 men were affiliated with the notorious Hispanic street gang called Norteños. Pablo was the driver. The other 3 got out of the vehicle and Pablo drove off. As Misty turned around after using the ATM, one of the suspects grabbed her and dragged her into the bank, and the other 2 men followed. Police arrived within a minute after being alerted. When the officer arrived, he saw the suspects and requested backup. 4 minutes later, the 3 suspects came out along with 3 hostages, Misty and 2 bank employees. They took one of the employees' SUV and forced all 3 women inside the vehicle. They sped off and multiple police officers chased after them. After driving a few blocks away, one of the suspects shot one of the bank employees and got out of the vehicle. It's not known whether she was thrown out or she jumped out herself. A police officer stopped to help the victim and the chase continued. What the officers didn't know yet is that these men were armed. All 3 carrying handguns and 1 carrying an AK-47 and had more than enough ammunition for a long shootout. Some have ammunition strapped to their bodies. The suspects drove to Lodi and finally back to Stockton. Both the suspects and officers exchanged fire during the 45-minute chase. 14 police vehicles were hit. Some were left disabled, including their armored vehicle. At 2:48 p.m., the suspects stopped at an off-ramp after briefly losing the police. All 3 had their weapons drawn, waiting for police so they can ambush. Once the police noticed them, they began firing and drove off again. 28 minutes later, another hostage had gotten out of the vehicle. Again, it's not known whether she was thrown or jumped off herself. The only hostage left now was Misty. 2 minutes later, the suspect's vehicle became disabled just a few minutes away from the bank they had taken the hostages from. The three suspects began firing at the police and a shootout began.
Where is that guy? Where is that motherfucker? They already got him. They already know where it is.
They're stopping right here.
Huh?
They're stopping right here. Fucking gunshots.
After a few minutes, the shooting from the suspects stopped. Alex and Gilbert were dead. Jaime was still alive because during the shootout he used Misty as a human shield. She had taken 10 bullets during the shootout and died at the scene. Jaime was the only survivor and was arrested and booked at San Joaquin County Jail. He was facing more than 30 charges including murder, kidnapping, robbery, and attempted murder. Police believe the suspect's only goal was to kill as many people as they could. Jaime would appear in court on July 21st.
Count 21 is the same charge, attempted murder on a peace officer, alleged occurred on the same date with the same sentencing enhancements. Count 22 is the same charge, attempted murder on a peace officer, alleged occurred on the same date with the same sentencing enhancements.
Police had suspected a fourth suspect, as they had no idea who Pablo was but knew someone had taken the suspects to the bank. It wasn't until September 16th of that year that Pablo was considered a person of interest. He turned himself in, but was released the same day. It wasn't until December 22nd that he was arrested again. Both were eligible for the death penalty, and the trial took 2 years, but finally in 2016, Pablo was sentenced to 25 to life, and Jaime was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Police were confident that Alex Martinez had robbed that same bank months prior on January 31st. 2 suspects had gone in and demanded money and stolen an employee's car. His father did come out shortly after the shooting took place and apologized to the people of Stockton for his son's actions and said that the police acted appropriately. As of now, the bank is gone and is now a Starbucks. But it's not a Starbucks because of the robbery. The day of the crime was its final day before being closed for good. Even though it's been years since this tragedy happened, the people in Stockton still remember this case very well. Denver, Colorado. The year is 1988. There was a man in the area who was on the run. The man is 24-year-old Philip Hutchinson. At this time, he was an escaped convict who escaped prison the year prior in Midway, Texas. He was serving a life sentence for aggravated robbery and other charges including the ransom kidnapping of a 13-year-old boy. He escaped once in September of 1984, but was recaptured 4 months later, and in July 1987 he escaped again by hot-wiring a truck and drove through a prison fence and managed to stay hidden since. He did this by stealing someone's driver's license. His new identity now was Mark Taylor. Surprisingly, this Mark Taylor looked a lot like Philip, so whenever he showed the ID to others, people believed it. Those that knew Philip as Mark admired him, but to authorities, he was a Marine deserter with a long criminal record. February 9, 1988. The time is 11:22 in the morning. Philip entered a credit union where 9 employees would be present. He asked the teller if he could cash a check. The teller says yes, and that's when Philip pulls out a gun and said, "Give me all your cash." Philip was handed nearly $3 grand. He quickly leaves and gets in his vehicle. As the 18-year-old teller was frightened, she ran out to get a good description of the vehicle Philip was driving. At that point, the teller runs back inside to call 911. Just 4 minutes after the 911 call, the police spotted Philip on Interstate 70. The chase would now begin. Nearby the high-speed chase, there was a news helicopter that was in the middle of shooting a story about highway constructions. The pilot, Mike Silva, received a call about a chase going on. He was asked if he can go and take a look, and that's when he starts taping. At this point, the chase has been going on for about 8 minutes in the local streets north of Denver. Police would try to drive towards Philip to stop or slow him down, but Philip was not stopping. He was driving towards them like he was willing to ram them. Police didn't know that this was Philip until later, and that's when police became more cautious. Detective Robert Wallace attempted to stop Philip by parking his car diagonally on the street. As Robert was getting out of his vehicle, Philip struck him, sending Robert hurtling over 100 feet. Robert died instantly. Police lost Philip as they all stopped to help the detective. Now the only people who knew Philip's exact location were everyone in the news helicopter, and Mike didn't want to lose him. Moments later, Philip lost control of his vehicle and crashed into a tree. Mike was communicating with someone at the TV station and asked someone there to call the police. Now police knew that Philip was running on foot and was right under Mike's helicopter. Philip grabs his bag of money and gun and begins running through the neighborhood looking for another vehicle. Minutes later, Philip was at a parking lot where he approached a vehicle with a young woman and her baby. Philip tried to force his way in, but she drove away. This infuriated him, and as the woman was driving away, he pulled out his gun and started firing at her. Luckily though, no one was hit, but one bullet was close to hitting her baby. Philip leaves the parking lot and into a trailer park that was a block away. This is when he noticed the news helicopter following him. He pulls out his gun and started firing at the helicopter. Afterward, he continued to run and approached a vehicle in the trailer park. Standing by the truck was a 73-year-old man named John who was with his granddaughter. Philip told him that if he even tries to make any signal towards the police, he will kill him on the spot. Mike Silva comes up with the idea to block the truck using his helicopter. Philip demanded John to ram the helicopter. John was too afraid and thought this was it. He was so certain that he wasn't going to see a tomorrow. Seconds later, a police officer rammed his vehicle on the right side of the truck, immobilizing it. More officers arrived with their weapons drawn, demanding Philip to come out. He refused and grabbed John by the neck and pointed his pistol towards John's cheek. Philip being surrounded by police, he made a mistake that gave police a chance to save John. Philip kept turning his head around to look behind, and every time he did, his gun would be pointed away from John's head. Police realized this, and when Philip turned his head for the 3rd time, officers took this chance and fired at him. 13 shots were fired. John was pulled out of the truck and Philip was pronounced dead at the scene. This came as a surprise for many people who were friends with Philip, or Mark as they knew. Some described him as a happy-go-lucky man who never had a job but always had money, which led to police believing Philip was a suspect in 4 bank robberies in the Denver area during January and February of that year. Officers later investigated whether or not their use of force was necessary and justified, but thanks to the shooting being filmed on camera, it was determined that Philip was given every opportunity to surrender, and it was clear to everyone that Philip had no desire to get arrested and go back to prison. Even Mike Silva was investigated by the FAA if his act of lowering his helicopter was justified, since he risked the lives of the people on the ground and the crew that were in it. But because of the situation, he was clear of any wrongdoing and was seen as a hero. If it wasn't for him, more people could have died. As we saw, Philip wasn't hesitant about killing anyone in his way.